learn to hate. They can be taught to love, for love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Nelson Mandela. We finished writing this book in the same week that men and women in El Paso, Texas, and Dayton, Ohio, were murdered by 2 white supremacists fueled by xenophobic hate and bigotry. Much to our dismay, these horrific crimes came on the heels of the very public taunting of 4 congresswomen of color with the epithet of "go back to your countries," and the dehumanization of Baltimore's black citizens by portraying them and their neighborhoods as infested by vermin. The growing racial tensions in our society and the impact it has had and will have on our individual psyche and who we are as a nation cannot be ignored and dismissed as isolated incidents because they keep adding up. Racism permeates every aspect of our country, and the time to address the pervasive impact of ideologies fueled by hate is now. In 1964, our country came the closest it ever has to legislate on behalf of racial justice. The 1964 Civil Rights Act was heralded as a moment in which we confronted in thought and action the wrongs committed in the name of whiteness. We must be willing to advocate for racial justice in all aspects of our society by expanding our knowledge on why and how we keep returning to the place where people are taught to hate instead of love, and where our differences are seen as what divides us and not what makes us stronger and more knowledgeable. In this time of public and overt hatred and bigotry, it is more important than ever that higher education leaders, faculty, staff, and trustees resolve to speak back and exercise racial equity with vigor and conviction. It is incumbent on higher education to mobilize the power of knowledge and moral leadership to combat the malaise of white supremacy, to prepare the next generation of leaders to not repeat the cycle of perpetual harm and trauma we are seeing today. Chapter 1. From Equity Talk to Equity Walk. A shared starting point. This equity journey begins with you. Change must happen individually before it can happen collectively. People drive change, lead change, and sustain change. Lasting change happens when educators understand both the meaning of equity and that meaning is represented through personal values, beliefs, and actions. This is why this journey must start with you. We want you first to engage in self-reflection on your current equity definition, values, and beliefs before we delve into the explanations and examples of what we mean by equity, and more specifically, racial equity. How do you define equity? What is your understanding of how equity and equality intersect or are codependent? What are specific examples of how equity is a value for you and to your institution? What motivates you to ensure equity at your institution? How does your understanding of equity translate into your values, beliefs, and actions? Do you have an equity talk and an equity walk? In our experiences working with educators at hundreds of higher education institutions, there is common desire among most to address equity in student outcomes. It is popular to hear, we want to close the equity gaps in graduation, progression, and retention for our underrepresented students. Or, closing the opportunity gaps in our student outcomes is our equity imperative. For most, this is the place where they enter into the equity conversation. In this context, equity is defined as understanding students' needs and addressing those needs by providing the necessary academic and social support services to help level the playing field so students can achieve their goals. Data are shared and discussed to highlight the equity gaps in student success. The institution makes a commitment to eliminate those gaps, and the interventions to do so are discussed and implemented. In this book, we will emphasize the importance of collecting data on student success outcomes. We realize that it is a critical first step for engaging in conversations about equity. What usually creates angst among some educators is when we turn the discussion to the reason for the equity gaps, and we point out that there are biases and privilege in the language we use to describe students.